Revolution.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this special show. CNBC TV18 presents Charging Up the EV Revolution. I'm your host, Parumita Chatterjee. Now, today we are here to talk about the electric vehicle revolution, and India seems to be well on its way. In fact, it's at par with many countries across the globe. Now, as all of us may have heard and read about, moving into electric vehicles has many advantages. For one, it cuts down on pollution, on carbon emissions. It has the potential to create jobs and overall give a big boost to the economy. So, there are many advantages of moving into the EV space. However, there are many challenges as well, and we'll discuss that in just a bit. But recognizing the necessity of such a transition, the government has come up with policies that act as tailwinds to the evolution of the sector. As a result, we are seeing a flurry of investments led by many new age startups as well. And even the big legacy players are waking up to this opportunity and the scope for this market to grow. Hence, CNBC TV18 is presenting this thought leadership series where we will be exploring on how to charge up the EV revolution. It's a series that aims to bring the who's who of the industry to discuss and deliberate on what lies ahead for the industry and how we can make India into a global hub for electric vehicles. So let me introduce you to our Power Pack lineup of panelists with us on the show. Starting with BVR Subbu, who's the well-known auto industry veteran, former president Hyundai India, and he's also an independent board member with Ola Electric. Anil Kumar, he's the CEO of Red Seer Consulting, which has done a lot of work in this space. Avnish Bajaj, who's the founder and MD of Matrix Partners India, and they have, in fact, already put their money where their mouth is and invested in some interesting companies in the EV space. Randhir Singh, who is Director Electric Mobility at Niti Aayog. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Mr. Subbu, let me start with you. And it is said by some that perhaps India is at a sweet spot as far as the electric vehicle revolution is concerned, because there's the right combination of government policy, the current economics with crude oil prices ratcheting up the way they are. It seems to be a very fertile ground for EVs to really grow in the country. What's your assessment at this point in time?
I think India is poised to see the EV space is poised to see a significant growth in India, not merely in the private vehicle space, the private mobility space, but in public transportation as well. What you saw as a startup, you had situations where you had the mopeds coming in, and you had the e-rickshaws coming in, let's say a decade back. And they have slowly given way to more advanced, more technologically competent vehicles. And what you have today is a slew of products, which today are global standard products, manufactured in India. There are, I would say, in terms both in two-wheelers and in four-wheelers, you see this trend. And this is bound to grow. And I expect, I wrote about this some 5 years back, and I forecast at that time that you were likely to see 10 million two-wheeler EVs being sold every year by 2025. I may have been a little maybe a little optimistic on that, but I wouldn't be too far off the mark. I also wrote then, and this was for the machine tool manufacturers, I wrote then that I expect the top end of cars, about 30% of cars, getting into that space by 2030. I do see that kind of thing coming through.
Are clearly poised. I think, as I said, a lot of combination of factors are coming together. And let me bring in Randhir Singh, who's Director Electric Mobility at Niti Aayog. And Mr. Singh, Niti Aayog has been spearheading a lot of the policy decisions. You've come up with some very interesting forecasts as well. But the fact of the matter is that if we look at the market, while the potential is huge and just a year-on-year growth of electric vehicles has been quite dramatic. However, overall, the contribution of the traditional ICE, the internal combustion engines, still plays a very dominant role because of many such factors. How is Niti Aayog sort of looking at the market currently? Because you've come up with very, sort of different scenarios for the market looking ahead.
Let me first start with quoting a World Bank report, which says the deep economic transformation of India will be accompanied by rapid growth in passenger and freight demand and requires transition to more sustainable transport solutions. And transport demand is expected to increase by 2.7 times over 30 years. In this context, e-mobility is definitely going to play a major role in India's transport transition during this decade. At the national level, Niti Aayog is leading the mission on transformative mobility and battery storage to promote clean, connected, shared, sustainable, and holistic mobility initiatives. Nonetheless, from the market penetration perspective, we have breached the 2.6% market share scenario in automotive sales from the electric vehicle side, but still a lot needs to be done. And the study reveals that by 2030, in business as usual scenario, 27 million vehicles and 69 million in the alternate scenario with an accumulated capital expenditure of 158 billion US dollar will be the size of the EV market. Now, there are few important things to accelerate the adoption at scale. And these three main factors are the competitiveness compared to the internal combustion engines, access to charging infrastructure, and the very important one is access to financing. So now, right now, the cost of efficiency of EVs relative to ICS as measured by the total cost of ownership over the vehicle lifetime, it varies significantly across vehicle and the market segments. These are mainly driven by the typical operating range, particulars of each city, attractiveness of the IC alternatives, and access to dependable charging infrastructure. This requires major new investments which are of course slowed by complex coordination and the challenging economies given current low EV penetration. So it's a chicken and egg problem which everybody says. It's essential to spread the higher upfront cost of EVs over time and align the cash flow associated with it.
So clearly the potential is there. Customers are waiting, but as you mentioned, infrastructure, that's been an issue. Who's going to fund that infrastructure? But yet we have, private investment coming in. And let me bring in Avnish Bajaj of Matrix Partners. And Avnish, you were one of the early players in this space, and you identified the two-wheeler space by making an early startup investment in Ola Electric. I mean, how do you see the sort of business dynamics currently when it comes to the EV market? Because there is a lot of money, a lot of investment which is required. All of it can't be funded by the government. And you, as a private player, have chosen to invest. So, what are those business metrics or dynamics which have prompted you to do so, wherein you see the potential on return on investment?
To your point on us investing in it, the belief was always there. I think it was a question of the time frame. And if you ask me, the first 2 years was slower than we expected, and the last 2 years has been faster than we expected. And my guess is the next 5 to 10 years, we may all get surprised on the upside of how this will play out. You mentioned we invested in two-wheelers. The reality is, if you look at the adoption, it started the place where electric is reasonably penetrated is already the e-rickshaws that, for example, run in Delhi, Gurgaon area. So there's that piece. Then there's the question that Mr. Randeer was also saying about battery infrastructure. When you put it all together and you put it in context of India is one of the largest two-wheeler markets in the world, with 20 to 25 million two-wheelers already being sold. And if you look at anybody, we would know people in our circles, if you look at the usage of two-wheeler, they would, a range of 100 to 150 kilometers in some cases. In Ola's case, it has hit 200 kilometers. That's more than enough. And the need for charging is as simple as plugging it into your outlet at home. So that's why that adoption is likely to lead and the chicken and egg issue being less of an issue between charging infrastructure and adoption. Now, as it comes to cars, as it comes to the range, will always be important. We all drive cars longer than we drive a two-wheeler, but also the kind of charging infrastructure will be required will change. So I think part of it is very large market, excellent push by the government, and policies coming out of, thanks to Niti Aayog and the government. Excellent push there. And I would argue reasonable level. What is under appreciated is the level of pull from the customers.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because we really want to go over and understand how can we move over this hump, because you're talking about customer pull. I mean, I've been on the fence when it comes to buying an EV because of some of the matters you just mentioned, the infrastructure. Where am I going to charge the car? What if it runs out of battery? Then you fall back on hybrid, and that's neither here nor there. So, Anil Kumar of Red Sea Consulting. Anil, you've analyzed this market. Do you agree with what, Avnish just said, which is that the two-wheeler market is already it's an easier market to evolve and grow given their infrastructure requirements? What's your assessment of how this market is likely to grow, and what is the biggest constraint as per you?
Just sort of taking a step back, if you look at the electric vehicles, right? So there are multiple segments within that, right? So you have two-wheelers, you have more of commercial vehicles, you have some of the four-wheelers and passenger vehicles, and all these three cohorts actually have a slightly to extremely different set of drivers and pulls and asks from EV. So in terms of the way the adoption would be for each of these categories would probably be very different, both from a supply side, demand side, technology from government. So definitely there's a different application which needs to be there for each of these sectors. But when you look at the two-wheelers specifically, right? So in our mind, basis whatever research we have done, we believe that the adoption of two-wheelers is going to be pretty rapid. And I would say that, as Subbu was saying, that 2025, 10 million probably looks a bit on a higher side. I would say probably it's not going to be very off, because going by multiple researchers and our own research, we believe that by 2030, which is just about 8 years from here, practically 80% of the two-wheelers you would see on the road would be electrical vehicles. So from two-wheeler point of view, 80% of that would be electrical vehicles by 2030. The adoption on, of course, commercial and the passenger vehicles would be lower, probably about 30%. But if you just put the maths together, we're talking about something about 100 million vehicles which are on electric vehicles, which would be there on the road by 2030. So that's, I think,
Right.
pretty massive. Just from a customer's perspective, we believe that there have been a lot of small and big improvement areas which have happened, right? From the range anxiety, from availability, from safety. We can speak about it a lot more in detail, but I think today's customer is a lot more comfortable buying this, and we see this only going to grow exponentially over a period of time.
Mr. Subbu, and Randhir, I'm going to come to you here, because of late, two-wheeler EVs have gotten a lot of bad press because of the safety concerns, batteries catching fire, so on and so forth. And also in that vein, the government has also introduced some standardization norms when it comes to some of these safety concerns. So two parts to my question, Mr. Subbu, let me start with you, is that, this whole issue of the two-wheeler market, which clearly appears to be the market with maximum potential, but also perhaps the maximum safety concerns. And, what do you make of these policy norms about standardizations, the new standards that industry has to meet with? Do you think this impacts both the business dynamics, as in, are companies prepared? Is it realistic to introduce these kind of norms at this current juncture?
Let me take you back many, many years to when the government started talking to the auto industry about, Bharat Stage 2 norms that they were. I remember how the industry was dragged kicking and screaming to bring up norms on emission in areas like this. Industry will typically tend to obfuscate on matters, try to look for excuses, try to look for ways out of a rapid technology scale up and so on. But I think the government is absolutely right in looking for standardization, because after all, who is your constituency? The consumer is your constituency, and you cannot you cannot morally try and bring out products which are not adhering to any kind of a standard. I think you can't today have somebody going out to China, buying, battery cells which are probably not, accepted by anybody else, and come in, or and then start building the batteries out here, and then those catch fire, and then the entire industry gets a bad name. So where do you start? You have to start with saying that we will mandate a certain standard in everything that is fitted into a vehicle. And then we will mandate a certain performance standard. I think it's completely understandable, and I believe the faster the government pushes these standards through, the better it is for the consumer.
Randeep Singh, let me ask you this question, because if you look at government policies so far, they've been huge enablers for a lot of the investments, for this kind of growth that we've seen in the market. It's been a carrot policy. Now there seems to be a bit of a stick, given some of the safety concerns. But in order for this market to evolve, how do you think the government policy needs to move? Because as I said, by 2024, many of those policies are actually going to lapse.
Let us understand first, it's not only the policy but the technology also which drives all these parameters together. And from government side, in fact, there are many steps which we have taken recently in both the directions. From the technology front also, for example, the PLI for advanced chemistry cells. So what happens is, right now almost 99% plus advanced chemistry cells are being imported. At cell level, they are imported from outside the country. The Advanced Chemistry Cell Program, which has received the 2.6 times of the available 50 gigawatt hour bids, almost to the tune of 128 gigawatt hour, this clearly shows the will for the localization in our country. That means first attack is on the production, the main root of the problem, that is the cells through which the issues arises. Now, second issue comes around the charging side. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are already aware that 17 charging standards has already been released by the BIS. In addition to this, Ministry of Power has come out with the charging guidelines, charging infra guidelines. In fact, this year it has already been, re-released with the updated information.
I'm just going to ask Avnish Bajaj to react here, because as an investor, when you have some of these norms come in, it just means perhaps further investments. But that's what we ultimately need. I mean, it's said that, some of these imported components simply won't work in India in the long haul. And we are seeing that play out with, some of these fire situations which have come up.
You look at EV penetration globally, there is not one tropical climate country in the world that has significant EV penetration. So, Norway, for example, has 70-80%. What's the weather over there? China has good penetration, but, generally cooler climates. So what may seem like a problem, I actually see as a big opportunity. And to Mr. Randeep's point, if you're looking at cell chemistry, if you're looking at battery management systems, if you're looking at each of manufacturing, obviously, of the cells from a tropical country, if the next wave of growth, we know in the context of global warming, has to be a lot of the countries that have low penetration need to increase their penetration. Well, guess which country can emerge as a global supplier for all that? It's India. So to me, a consumer doesn't care what the chemistry is, what the reason is. Absolutely, the safety has to be paramount.
Anil Kumar, as a consultant who's been analyzing this space, the fact of the matter is everyone recognizes investments need to be made in India because we have a completely different climate that makes issues like battery fires. We are much more prone to that. Yet we see perhaps more imports than any sort of manufacturing facilities being set up, barring a few. So, how do you address some of the points that have been just shared right now?
I think we are at a journey, at the beginning of the journey, and the amount of the traction which the two-wheelers, four-wheelers, and EV in general have seen in India is at a very, very initial stages right now. The good part is, as I think Avnish was talking about, the adoption has actually taken quite a bit of a growth in last couple of years. And as we see, there is a significant set of vehicles which are being sold in Indian market. This is where now the need of really start doing a complete end-to-end vertical integration starts coming in. But at the same time, I think when it comes to really creating a success story, companies like Ola, which have done a vertical integration, I think that's something which I already spoke about, is going to be one of the important plays in the market that you cannot outsource, or you cannot sort of pick the technology from outside India and create a successful solution.
Mr. Subbu, you have been predicting many changes for the industry, including for the for the ICE market as well, the ICE market as well. What's your prediction now going forward?
I believe that what this country will see is a very, very rapid growth in electric, in the acceptance of EV technologies. I believe you will see the mass markets will move very rapidly. The two-wheeler markets will move very rapidly. I expect that with a little bit of government push, all intra-city commercial vehicle movement can actually become electric within the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, the future is definitely electrified. Anil Kumar, how do you see the future?
Two-wheelers are bound to be anywhere between 70% to 100% in next 8 to 9 years go electric, and then followed by a more centralized approach, which is the government-owned buses and large fleets, which could be sort of moved to electric much more easily. And then probably the third wave is about four-wheelers, which is a bit more trickier, relatively more trickier to solve for. But there as well, we're expecting at least about 20 to 30% of the vehicles start getting into electric mode by next 8 years or so.
Right. Avnish Bajaj, your view of what the future looks like?
So my net prediction, Bill Gates has said this before, that as technologists, we tend to overestimate what will happen in the near term and underestimate what will happen in the long term. And I am there in terms of the EV ecosystem and the EV story for India. I don't know what will happen in 2025, but my view is 2030 will exceed all of our optimistic projections.
Final word goes to you, Randhir Singh from Niti Aayog. Everyone's talking about 2030. What's going to happen in 2025? What's your prediction? What do you think are going to be the key focus areas?
Definitely, future is going to be electrified, as somebody said already. And there are three key areas, and I must say these are, to my mind, these are the three areas wherein we will see a lot of focus and innovation. One is from the business model side. We will see a different battery as a service business models. We will see auxiliary resource management such as BMS, connectors, software responsiveness. Second important part is robust recycling and the reuse setup. This is the area wherein a lot of focus is required, right from our dependency on the raw materials, right from our dependency on the processing of the raw materials, all those things. And the third part, in fact, this is the area wherein the world's biggest companies are right now, striving to get hold on, is the right skill and the capacity. The skilling and the capacity building. These are the three key areas on which we will see a lot of focus and innovation in coming days in our country.
Okay, gentlemen, it's been a fascinating discussion and eye-opener as well. And as a customer, I think I've been pushed a little bit more to the EV side. I mean, looking at some of the key movements and changes which are coming in, but clearly the future is electrified, and EV mobility is here to stay and here to grow in India. Thank you so much for joining us on this very special discussion brought to you by CNBC-TV18.
CNBC-TV18